This program is funded in part by a grant from Humanities Nebraska.
Friends, are we ready to get this Storytelling Festival started? Again, my name is D. Wayne Taylor. I'll be your master of ceremonies for the evening. Thank you all so much for coming out. We sincerely appreciate it. Last year when we did this, it was, man, hopefully these tickets go, and the whole place filled up. Y'all just saw what happened right then. The community that's here in Lincoln and in greater Nebraska needs storytelling. You know what I mean? This right here just proves it. And I was telling someone else, I was like, watch. Next year, we're going to get a bigger venue, then a bigger venue, then a bigger venue. That's all because of this community right here who supports us. So again, from the Nebraska Storytelling Festival, thank you all. Can you please give yourselves a round of applause? The storytelling history is thick here in Nebraska. For hundreds of years, stories have been passed down. This right here tonight is the next iteration of passing along our stories as Nebraskans. We begin our Nebraska Storytelling Festival with none other than Kate Bolz. Question: how are love and a really wild bat connected? There are lots of stories about falling in love, and there are lots of stories about bats. This one is definitely a lot more than that. Please, a round of applause for Kate Bolz.
Did you know that bats can hiss? I did not know that bats hiss until I encountered one on a cold night this winter. This bat turned me into a quivering, whimpering mess. And I want you to know that this is not my typical state. I like to think of myself as a strong, smart, independent woman like my mama raised me. But this bat turned me into a bowl of Jell-O. Now, I have a master's degree, I've traveled the world, I own my own hammer, but this bat turned me into a mess. So much so that I now refer to the night that we ran into the bat as the night of the bat. The night of the bat came after a long day, week, month, and year. I had just started a new job with the United States Department of Agriculture, and I was working long hours trying to learn the role. My husband, Sean, works for the Nebraska Unicameral and was slogging through the misery of late-night midwinter debates. We were both just grinding through. In addition to that, we had recently moved into Sean's childhood home, which means that we were sorting through his stuff and my stuff and family stuff, everything from a used big old hot tub to the ashes of the family cat. It was a lot, and I was feeling sort of taken for granted. The day of the night of the bat, I had spent in the garage, sorting through way too many garden implements and really an embarrassing number of CDs and DVDs for anyone to have in 2023. I was exhausted, so I went to take a shower, and Sean walked the few blocks down to the neighborhood bar to have a beer. I put myself to bed telling myself a sad sack little bedtime story about how I was taken for granted and how I did all the work around here and that I was a strong woman and I shouldn't have to do all the cleaning. So telling myself and singing myself my sad little lullaby, I went to sleep. I woke myself up screaming. I did not know that your body could scream without your brain's permission. I woke myself up screaming and whimpering and literally hiding and huddling under a blanket in my bedroom. And my stupid little Neanderthal brain was convinced that we were being attacked by a hairy flying monster, that we were imperiled and that our lives were in danger, and that there was a dinosaur flying across the ceiling and coming to take us away. Finally, the rest of my nervous system woke up and flight or fight kicked in, and I did not fight. I flighted. I got out of there. So I finally sat down at the top of the stairs and tried to get myself together. And I said to myself, aren't I a strong, smart, independent woman? Can't I handle a bat? Should I go get my hammer? And the answer was no. No, I am not. No, I cannot handle this bat. So I watched the bat fly around the bedroom ceiling. And it occurred to me that what I was in fact a married woman. And I called my husband. And once my husband deciphered what the heck I was actually trying to say, he very kindly agreed to walk the few blocks home and help me out. Now, one of the things that I love about Sean is that he has the gift of command. He has broad shoulders and a big booming voice, and he knows how to enter a room. And when he came home, it was like he was walking in like a one-man army. He came charging down the stairs, armed with the top of the family toolbox, held in his hand like a shield. And he was wearing the buzz of inebriation from the bar like armor. And Sean, he charged down the stairs and he went straight into the bedroom, and with a bang and a grunt and a thwack, he had that bat in a shoebox, duct tape closed. It was glorious. It was glorious. It was glorious. And I said something to him that I don't think I had ever said to him before. I said, I'm so glad I married you. But my ordeal wasn't over. See, something else about Sean is that Sean knows things. And what Sean knew was that because I had been asleep when we discovered the bat, it was possible that that evil, vile little sucker had bit me with its gross little teeth while I was asleep. And so, he informed me, we had to take the bat in the duct tape shoebox to the public health department the next morning to be tested for rabies. So the morning after the night of the bat, I very bravely, I thought, put the bat and the shoebox on the passenger seat of my car, and I drove the two of us to the public health department. And very gingerly, I picked up the box to try to take us both inside. And that's when that little shit hissed at me. It hissed, and it writhed, and it made noises and grunting and tried to get out of the box. And so I threw the box on the ground, right? What else was I gonna do? So I stood there yelling at the box, and a very nice-looking gentleman made a wide berth around me in the parking lot because he didn't want to deal with the weird lady who was yelling at the shoebox. So again, I gathered myself together, and I picked up the shoebox, and I walked inside, and the very, very kind souls at the public health department calmly took my bat and agreed to test it for rabies. So later that day, I was able to go home and tell my husband that even though I had been feeling a little bit out of sorts, that I was very grateful to him for his bravery and his patience with me. And I was able to tell him, thanks to the nice people at the health department, that we didn't have bat rabies. I was also able to recognize that even though I am a strong, smart, independent woman, it was okay that I had learned to rely on my husband, because he relied on me too for things like cleaning and keeping the house together. And so now, Sean and I, we have a deal. I always clean the downstairs bathroom, and Sean deals with any and all creepy and crawly, flying, crazy, flying, nasty critters and bats, for as long as we both shall live. Thank you.
One more time for Kate Bolz. We call that a bat in a shoebox. Kate is the hero with you today. Sean, can we see you, Sean? We will give a round of applause to our hero, Sean. I might need to use your services sometimes. I tell you, if I run into a bat, I'm running out the house and calling you, brother. I tell you what. Yeah, I'll trade you with that one. Up next, we have a life-changing visit to Africa. On a trip to Ghana, Kwame met the king of a tribe and had a chance to sit and talk to him in private for an hour. This life-changing experience is one you get to hear about now. Please welcome Kwame Gyamfi with a life-changing visit to Africa.
I want you to imagine you're a ship and you're adrift. No rudder, no sail. Just adrift on the ocean. Now imagine this happens for 400 years. Luck may put you at a port, and when you get off the boat, the people at the port tell you, you are not welcome here. Turn around. Go back where you came from. That's what it feels like being an African American. Adrift. No rudder, no sail, no connection. So 2 years ago, I got into a car accident. Don't worry, everybody was fine. Nobody got hurt, seriously. And it was not my fault, okay? So I received a settlement. I decided, since I taught African history, it would probably be a good idea if I visited Africa. So I started my research. I knew that I wanted to go to Ghana, which is in West Africa, and I wanted to go there particularly because that was a port of departure for my ancestors. So I did what anyone would do when they want to plan a trip. I went on Facebook, and I looked for a couple Facebook groups that were traveling Facebook groups, and I said, reached out to them. I got a slew of responses, weeded them out, and I met a young man named Bright who lived in Ghana. Now, Bright was a member of the Ahanta tribe. It's a tribe I had never heard of. And all my research and studies, I had never heard of this tribe. So I was really intrigued. And they had a storied history. They had a powerful king. So Bright said to me, would you like to meet the king? Well, of course. Who would not want to meet a king? So there were some exchanges that had to be made in order for this meeting to take place. I had to send them a sample of my writing. I had to send a formal letter of request. I had to donate to the king's school. And I also had to buy him 2/5 of White Bridge gin, which was his favorite gin, and I obliged. So, now, this is a different story on the travels to Ghana. It's a 19-hour flight. There was layovers. There was all kind of stuff. That was a whole different adventure. But when I finally get to Ghana and I land, two things happened. First, I started sweating immediately because it was hot. I mean, hot, hot. Secondly, I had this feeling of relief that came over me. Now, it could be because I was on a 19-hour flight. It could be because I was stressed out about the trip and the relief of finally landing. Or it could be the anticipation about what was going to happen next. So, I get to the palace, which is a whole nother adventure. And the first thing you have to do is you have to meet the chieftain council. It's a group of men that are up on this platform. They have an interpreter and all these other people there. And this was an actual session that they invited me to. They were talking politics, they were talking all kind of stuff. When it was time for me to speak, the prince stood up. They asked me to stand up, say my name, and state my intentions. In that moment, I did not want to say my name. And I wanted to apologize for speaking English. And I wanted to apologize for not having an African name. So the chieftains started talking to each other. They kind of huddled together, and they were talking in Ahanta. Ahanta is a verbal language. It has no written language. And the interpreter stood up and he said, "From this moment forward, your name is Kwame Ninsa Gyamfi." My eyes started welling up. My heart started racing. That name means wise one born on Saturday. Now, what's interesting is they did not know I was born on Saturday, but I am born on Saturday. So, after I left the chieftain council, the prince walked me down a hallway. I sat in what was like an interior living room. There were no windows. There were just these pictures on the wall of the king and all these dignitaries. He'd been the king for 40 plus years, one of the longest reigning kings in Africa. And I sat there. I took my phone out, took a couple pictures, put it away, because I wanted to be in the moment. I did not want to look through my phone. I wanted to look through my own eyes and remember this forever. So then the prince came into the room it seemed like forever. He said, "The king will see you now." Walks me down this narrow hallway, sits me in a chair next to this bed. The king is sitting in the bed, he's sitting up, and he's watching me as I walk in the room. He's an old face, he's gentle face. His eyes look like they've seen 1,000 things. And we started talking. Now I had a list, I had questions I was gonna ask him. I threw it all away. In that moment, that conversation was all that mattered. We talked about life, love, family, how he became king. I talked about the perils of African Americans. By the end of that meeting, that conversation, he looked at me and he said, "You are always welcome here." So I left. Later on that day, I was on a beach at an area what's called 3 Points. And I was sitting there with Bright, and I was just talking about what had just happened, trying to fathom what had just occurred. I met Otumfor Badubansu the 15th, the direct descendant of Otumfor Badubansu the 2nd, the founder of the Ahanta Empire. So, he passed away earlier this year. And I say to this day, Medase Otumfo Badabantu the 15th, for helping me find my sail and my rudder and making me feel welcome again. Thank you.
Kwame, that's got to be made into a movie. Like, really, though? Doesn't it? Can we give him another round of applause? You got to meet the king? Next, we have a story of a Northwesterner getting to turn literally into a Midwesterner. You know, going from those nice pine wood trees all the way to like our humidity and AC. You'll get to hear how ranch dressing and Nebraska totally come together in this wonderful story from Brittany Wren called And a Side of Ranch Dressing. Please welcome Brittany Wren.
Well, about 10 years ago now, my husband and I were in New York, we're in Manhattan, and we're getting ready to board a train bound for Lincoln. Well, we arrived at the train station about 2 hours early, and we're like, well, we don't really want to sit on this hard wooden bench with all of our other train friends for 2 hours. So we went across the street to a restaurant. Well, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it is packed full and busy, just like everywhere else in Manhattan. And so we decide, okay, well, we need to order something. What is the cheapest thing on the menu? Let's sit at the bar and order French fries and a side of ranch. So the bartender looks at us, and he looks at both of us, and he just kind of blinks, and he says, with no question marks, "You're from the Midwest, aren't you?" And of course, Dylan, my husband, answers immediately, "Yeah, we're from Nebraska," and they have this whole side conversation. Meanwhile, my answer is a little more complicated, and I immediately think two things. First of all, how dare you? I mean, you're insulting ranch and the Midwest all at once. Like, you're serving $16 cocktails to fancy people in suits, and we're ordering French fries, and you think we're unsophisticated. Like, what did we ever do to you? And then the second thing I thought was, wait, we're a we now? I'm from the Midwest. When did this happen? See, this is news to me because I grew up in Washington State in the Northwest, and in case you all haven't been acquainted with a Northwesterner, we are a little snobby. Yes, so we're snobby about two things, mainly food. So we have our cold brew coffee, our cold pressed juice, our organic food, our vegetarian food, our vegan food, our ethnic food, and when we're done eating, we enjoy our outdoors. So we have the mountains and the snow and the glacier-fed lakes, and when you walk out into the lake and you're waist deep in the water and you look down at your toes and you can see your toes. That's how clear the water is. And in case you missed it, this is the Northwest snobbery coming out a little bit. So everyone loves ranch, even in the Northwest. So I don't know if any of you ever have made ranch dressing at home. Well, I have made it in an industrial setting many times. So I actually, in high school, worked in my high school cafeteria, and we served vegetarian food only, which is a whole other story. But as you can imagine, about 500 hungry high school athletes coming through a line in the cafeteria, and we're serving them vegetarian food, which this is back in the 90s, so vegetarian meat didn't bleed. It's mostly like some sort of congealed soy protein and some cream of mushroom soup. So as you can imagine, the hungry athletes are eating a lot of salad, and they're eating a lot of things dipped in ranch, which I got to make. So as a 14-year-old, I got to make the ranch, and this is done in a giant metal bowl about the size of an electric car. And you bring out these gallons of buttermilk and these giant seasoning packets about yay big, which have Hidden Valley Ranch messaging all over them, but I swear it tastes better when you make it. It's better. And then comes the mayonnaise. It comes in a 5-gallon bucket, and I'm 14, and I'm hauling this 5-gallon bucket from the cooler, which is like 5 times the size of my current closet, from the cooler over to this giant metal mixing bowl, and you like prop it up on the bowl, and you're scraping with this giant spatula, you're scraping all the mayonnaise into this mixing bowl. So I smelled really wonderful after work, and yes, I love ranch, even knowing what it's made of, which is mostly mayonnaise. So fast forward a few years, and my parents moved to Nebraska, and I moved with them because, let's face it, I needed a place to live. And I came rather reluctantly. I specifically remember on several distinct occasions saying, I'm never going to live in Nebraska. Well, famous last words, and I'm sorry. So one of the first things that I came to love about this place, about Lincoln, Nebraska, is the food, and specifically the ranch dressing, which is like a whole other food group here. I mean, you've got, sure, the chicken's great, the steak is tender, but what about the ranch? I mean, we've got Breda's Ranch, Amigo's Ranch, we've got Laszlo's Creamy Garlic, which is just bougie ranch. So yeah, I love ranch, and I love the people here who make the ranch, and I think this is one of the things that really bothered me in New York when this bartender is insulting my ranch and my people that I have come to love. It didn't sit right with me. So it's in that moment, and ever since I look back on that as the moment when I decided I can be from 2 places. I can be from the Northwest and the Midwest, but I come from one people, and my people love ranch.
One more time for Brittany Wren. Brittany, you really gotta love ranch. Like, you was talking about scooping the mayonnaise. I was all the way with you, and she's talked about get the 5 gallons of mayonnaise, and you're just scooping it in there? My goodness, you're the ranch queen. One more round of applause for Brittany Wren. Our next storyteller is Sarah Rasby. Her story is about the life-altering event and the life that followed as the result of her twin sister's sudden cardiac arrest in 2018. Sarah instantly became a primary caregiver for a person with a complex disability and brain injury within a matter of seconds. Her life changed completely. Please welcome to the stage, performing Shifting from What Isn't to What Is, Sarah Rasby.
First of all, I just want to say I love the creamy garlic from Laszlo's. All right. So if you've ever been a part of an icebreaker before, there's usually the question of, what's unique about you, right? And so my answer to that question is, well, I'm a twin. And people are always like, oh, what's it like to be a twin? And I never really knew how to answer that. So a lot of times I would just answer with, well, what's it like not being a twin? I just didn't know. So over the years, I got that question a lot more, and I answer with, well, it's like having your best friend with you all the time, someone to play with, someone to, borrow clothes from, someone to talk to, someone to argue with, right? Someone to just live life's up and downs with, but most importantly, just somebody to laugh with. And I remember when we were little girls, we would try to go to sleep at night, and we had twin beds and bunk beds, and we would just tell each other stories and just laugh. And I can still just remember the sound of her voice and her laughter. But of course, like I was saying, we got into trouble quite a bit, and even from the time we were babies, the other thing about being a twin is you're usually socialized as a pair. So to kind of decipher between us, when we were little, my dad told me that when we were babies that he nicknamed me the little one, and my sister Erin, my twin sister, was Air Bear, and went by Bears. And so I kind of internalized that nickname of the little one because, you're constantly comparing yourself to someone growing up. You're not so much focused on you as a twin. It's like, what's she doing all the time? But I proudly internalized that. I loved being the little one. She was born first by a minute. She was brave. I just always looked at her as like my big sister, my protector. I was kind of like the Thelma to her Louise in the sense that she was very logical and tough, and I was a little bit carefree and a little bit more timid. And Erin was just so outgoing and just made so many people laugh, including in first grade. We were actually in 2 different separate classrooms, and it was show and tell day. And I'm in my classroom getting ready for show and tell, and all of a sudden here comes Erin. They bring her in from the other classroom. I'm like, what is going on? She comes in and they're like, Erin, show everyone what you brought for show and tell. So she's got something behind her back and she whips it out and holds it up like this. It's my dad's Garfield Valentine's Day underwear. She brought them for show and tell. So she stole my thunder that day. Needless to say, that was not a fun phone call that my dad got from the office, because they made her go down and show all the teachers. It was hilarious. That just goes to show you who my sister was. And so then, we grow up together and we go to college together and we end up being in separate sororities, but we live in the same dorm. We even dated the same best friends, or a group of these 2 guys who were best friends from Wyoming. Like, how does that happen? And it was good. We were starting to develop our own identities, and still my big sister. And then life goes on. She moves to California. I follow her. She's chasing corporate sales. I'm in human services, just wanting to help people. She's wanting to just conquer the world. We move a couple different places, but always very close. And long story short, we end up back in Lincoln, Nebraska, because we went to college here and we're from Nebraska. And we started to settle down, really, plant our roots here. I got married, I had children. Erin followed, moved back to Lincoln. And then things just started to change. She wasn't feeling very well, so back in 2018, and I remember I was at home one night bathing my kids, and I get that phone call, the one that you never want to get, and just instantly her fiance telling me something's wrong. We're going to the hospital, so I drop everything, and I'm like, I'm not gonna panic, she's my sister, this is gonna be fine. I get to the hospital, I walk into, the emergency room, and there's my sister's fiance and her son, who had just turned 1 10 days before, so this was November 12, 2018, and we go back into a room, and here comes the nurse, and she says, when your sister got here, she wasn't breathing. And I just instantly lost it, I went blank. I just remember being in shock, my hands started to curl, my heart was racing. This is unbelievable. Can this just not happen to everybody, but this cannot happen to my one person that I look up to for everything. It was devastating, and I remember looking at her as she lied in that bed with the ventilator thinking, what am I going to do about this? How am I, she's got to come back from this, right? This is not the story, this is not how this happens. But unfortunately, she did have a severe brain injury that we learned, and the first 3 months were very tough. It was very touch and go. We didn't know if she was going to live. We didn't know what was going to happen. If anyone knows anything about brain injury, it's devastating, it's heart-wrenching. She lost her ability to talk. She lost her ability to walk, to move her body. She could do nothing. So for that first year, she lived for 3.5 years, but during that time, something woke up inside of me. And it wasn't so much this mama bear mentality. It was something different. It was this, I can't do this without you, so therefore, I'm going to do whatever I can to help you. I want you to get better. I want you to be who you were, because we'll never have what we had unless you were the way you were. So I fought for her. I advocated for her. I went through the unimaginable just to try to get her back to where she was. And throughout the years, I just finally realized that wasn't going to happen. And so I took her lead instead, and trying to look up to her as my big sister, which she always was, but then I realized, if I'm going to endure this and also to live with this, then I have to believe in myself. And I really have to start focusing on what is instead of what isn't anymore. I have to love her. And so in that moment, I decided to just be her sister instead of expecting things from her, trying to change things. And that was probably the most beautiful thing I could ever do, because I realized what she was ultimately doing was teaching me the hardest lesson in life is how to let go. And so Erin passed on June 24th of 2022, and to say that I miss her is an understatement, but I will say I will always be the little one, but this time I'm a lot more stronger because I learned everything from her, and I'm so thankful for that, so thank you.
Sarah talked about Erin's son, Teddy, turning 1 in her story. Today is Teddy's birthday. He's turning 6 years old. Yeah. It's one of the reasons that Sarah wanted to share that story. Unfortunately, Teddy's not here today. That would be awesome, but he will be seeing the recording. So if we all could, on the count of 3, just say a happy birthday to Teddy. 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday, Teddy! Thank you so much. Give Teddy a round of applause. Thank you, Sarah. Our next story is called The Swim Meet. As a kid, she spent summers at the swimming pool. Off and on throughout life, swimming has brought quiet, solitary, and comfort and peace. Until, in her 50s, she was asked to be on an unlikely team. Please welcome T. Marni Voss performing The Swim Meet.
Yeah, thank you, love, thank you. I would have to say the biggest, oh, thanks, honey. The biggest fear that I had as a child at the swimming pool is I was always so scared that just as I got to the end of the high board, you know, the high board, people, that just as I got there, that a huge wind would come up and blow me over sideways onto the low board, where I would hit my face and upper body, and that everyone would see that. That all my friends would see that and want me to do it again. It's a swimming pool, you know? Remember when you were a kid? I mean, the swimming pool, it's like little wet footprints. Little wet footprints, and I don't know, remember baby lotion? And of course, there was that warm cement you laid on during safety check. That Van Morrison had it right. Remember when Van Morrison said we were the youth of 1,000 summers? And we just were. There was never. Hey, honey.
Do me a favor and put it right up by your chin for us? Thank you.
It's not very comfortable. There was seldom a day in the summer that I didn't spend time at the swimming pool. I mean, it was 7 blocks from my house, and we all know all we ever needed was a rolled up towel, right? That's what we needed. We needed a pool pass, and we needed a nickel for the treat, which was almost always gonna be the taffy. It was always the taffy. Remember that big rectangle, flat, tri-colored sheet in that wax paper? It's why I went swimming. It just was. And you know, if I couldn't find my friends, there was always new friends to be made. The pool was just all joy. It was just all joy. And I really believe this. Honey, help me. I really believe this. I think the relationship I started with water as a child truly has served me and followed me all of my life, whether it was at a hotel swimming pool or a fitness center. I like swimming. I like it, you know. And some years back, I was on my way at a local fitness center. I was on my way to the swimming pool, and there was a sign on the wall, and it said that the swimming pool would be closed this following Saturday because there was going to be a swim meet. There were two older women in the swimming pool, Louise and Marion. I'd see them a couple times a week. I waved and, slipped into the water. But in the middle of my workout, Marion stood. I don't like this mic. Marion stood at the end of my lane, and she had her caps flipped up over her ears, and she had her goggles just resting right above her eyebrows, and she leaned over. She was like, "Will you be on my relay team this Saturday?" And I hadn't been to a swim meet since like junior high, and I loved it then, and I'm thinking, I don't know, I was kind of excited. I thought this was going to be fun. I think it is safe to say that I was completely clueless. I got to the pool that Saturday, and I found Marion. She was our team captain. Our team consisted of Marion, Louise, and me. That was it. And there she was in what I believe was a brand new, big, beautiful purple swimsuit. She had her cap snapped below her chin. She said it muffled the tiles off the swimming, walls and stuff. And then she had her goggles. Her goggles were in place. She had them just the way she liked them. She wasn't taking them off. And I said, I don't know. I don't think I'm going to wear my goggles diving into the pool. And she was like, wow, they're your eyes. I looked at Louise, and Louise was like, well, she just had eye surgery. She was going to wear her goggles, but she was, going to kick off the side. I thought, well, I'm just going to go to the bathroom. I'll be back. So on the way back, I passed the registration table, and it's covered. There's nobody there, but it's got sheets of paper on it and stuff. And one of the sheets of paper had the list of teams. Yeah, Dolphins, Fast Heat, Little Guppies, Slow Heat, YMCA, Fast Heat, Shanks Group, Fast Heat, Mini Mermaids, Slow Heat, Sea Snails. So I asked Marion, I'm like, Marion, what's the name of our team? And she looked at me through those fogged up goggles and proudly announced that we were the Sea Snails. Our first event came up, and I was to go, and then Louise would go, then Marion would go, and then I would go again. So I'm standing at the end of the lane, and there is a mini mermaid to my right, and there is a little guppy to my left. He is looking at me with complete and total disgust. So the whistle was blown. I dove into the water. My goggles snapped back to my chin. The little guppy was kicking my ass. But the mini mermaid, she was struggling. So then Louise kicked off the wall. Louise had a style of her own. It sort of resembled swimming in place. I mean, the good news was, if the cruise ship went down, she would not be the first to drown. Next, Marion dove into the water. She was a consistent swimmer, but when she got to the wall, she attempted a flip turn. It was like slow motion, you know? I mean, she went down, and then her lovely, kind of big, purple butt floated to the top like a buoy. It just bobbed there. And Louise and I are yelling at her purple butt, "Go, Marion! Go!" But now Louise is starting to panic. Louise is like, "I think she's stuck." "No, I really think she's stuck. I think you should push her bottom down." I'm like, "What? No. No." And we look down, and now her butt is starting to disappear. And she surfaces, and she gasps for air, and she shoots back down the lane. I don't know. When the sea snails swam, it kind of gave everyone an opportunity to rest. You know, call home, have a sandwich, maybe blow dry your hair. I mean, everybody was very kind to us, something I'm sure they learned in church. And everybody got gifts, which was really nice. I got a new pair of goggles, of course. I know, kind of perfect. And you know, really, once I changed it to my street clothes, I don't think anyone recognized me as a sea snail. In all actuality, I mean this, I really had a good time. I really did. I mean, in spite of everything, it actually was fun, you know? And afterwards, my new friends, Marion and Louise and myself, we went for a cup of decaf and a slice of pie.
One more time for T. Marni Voss. My diaphragm's gonna have to rest a little bit after that one. You are funny. Our next story comes from Farris Naff. Think about some of the most preposterous stories that your family has ever told you. Clay tells a story illustrating how all of us should harvest and cherish those memories and stories from our elders. Lies my family told me. Welcome, Farris Naff.
My, this is a big crowd. Okay, now I'm scared. Let me tell you, my young friends, holiday gatherings used to be different. There was a time when the festive table was free of conspiracy theories, gender pronoun complaints, and sports talk. Back in the day, when the meal was done, a wagon load of family stories would roll through the parlor. As the logs crackled in the fireplace, stories of heroic grandmas and odd uncles, of possibly royal relatives and legendary ancestors would fill the room like sweet-smelling smoke. And they were all, or very nearly all, a pack of monstrous lies. Picture my disappointment when, in my early 20s, I began to learn the truth about my family. Here's what you need to know. My mother, Joan, was an only child, and she was, on the whole, a pretty truthful person. So I'm really talking about the large, loud, lovable immigrant family she acquired when she married my dad, Tom Naff. His father, Farris al-Naff, first emigrated to America way back in 1895. At that time, the country he sailed away from was merely a province in the Ottoman Empire. When he arrived here in America, he scraped a living by peddling door to door from the border of Canada all the way down to Texas and then back again. He did this for years until he had accumulated enough money to go back to Lebanon and marry my grandmother, Yamna. Farris and Yamna began to raise a family, but after a while, they decided to emigrate to America again. So in 1920, Farris and Yamna, with their two daughters, Wadad and Alixa, set sail for Ellis Island. Once there, they moved on and settled in Detroit, where Farris and Yamna opened a grocery store and raised their family, in all 5 children, my dad being the youngest. Now, this much is true, but let me tell you some of what I heard at holiday gatherings. Grandpa Farris was the namesake of his uncle, a great and noble horseback warrior. Grandma Yamna smuggled her old world yogurt into this country by drying it in a hanky and then reconstituting it with New World milk. Bootleg dairy was just the beginning. On the voyage over from Lebanon, little Wadad caught a cold, and Farris and Yamna were afraid she would be turned away at Ellis Island. So they rolled her in a Persian carpet and smuggled her in. And get this, my Aunt Alixa once went out on a date with Danny Thomas. Yes, that Danny Thomas, TV star, nightclub comedian, and founder of St. Jude's Hospital. Now, who could possibly believe that Alixa Naff, Detroit Lebanese grocery clerk, went out on a date with Danny Thomas? They might as well have told me that she also went clubbing with Marilyn Monroe or rode around on the back of James Dean's motorcycle. But as a child, I cherished and believed in all of these family stories. Well, as I became an adult, I shed many childhood things: Spider-Man pajamas, lightsabers, and belief in the family tales. There were trace elements of truth in them. It is true, for example, that my grandfather's name, Farris, which I bear, in Arabic connotes great horsemanship. But he was no warrior, and so far as I can tell, neither were any of his ancestors. It's also true that on the voyage over, little Wadad caught a cold, and Farris and Yamna were worried about it. But if they had had a Persian carpet, they wouldn't have rolled her up in it. They would have flown her in, right? And as for the yogurt, well, today, smuggling dried yogurt into America from the Middle East, that would be bioterrorism, right? Back then, maybe it happened that way. When it comes to the story of Alixa going out with Danny Thomas, however, no way. I was sure that was all romantic moonshine. My Aunt Alixa was a well-built woman, but I have to tell you, she could be a bit of a hellcat. Not only did she remain single all her life, but in the course of it, she drove away many of her friends and most of her family members by picking ferocious fights with them over and over again. For example, at my college graduation, She got into a blistering argument with my dad over some triviality, where to have lunch or something like that. She threw down a stack of books and stormed out. And my parents never really forgave her. Me, I was kind of amused by it. I knew better than most the strength of character it took to be Alyssa Naff, a woman who defied all the expectations of her parents, her culture, and her times. She remained single all her life, but in that role, she traveled all over America and Europe and the Middle East, alone in a VW bug, collecting immigrant stories. Those stories later became the basis of her doctoral thesis, and once she had earned her PhD, she went on to become the founder of the Smithsonian's Arab American Archive. But eventually, old age caught up with her, and having driven away so many people in her life, she turned to me to take care of her in her old age. I gladly said yes. I was honored to do it. She had been kind to me when I was a child, and she took me on some of those adventures of hers. So I was happy to do it, and I did the best I could to make her final years happy ones. When she died in 2013, I organized a family gathering to celebrate her life. Elders from all over gathered in my parents' living room. It was a noisy affair, as partly deaf nonagenarians competed to make themselves heard. Above the din, one story caught my ear. My dad's cousin, Larice, said, "Remember when Alyssa went out on a date with Danny Thomas?" "What?" I yelled. "Are you telling me Alyssa really had a fling with Danny Thomas?" Larice said, "Oh, Danny, his whole family was Lebanese. We knew them all. He was back in Detroit to visit his little brother, and they went out." I said, "They went out? You mean Alyssa and Danny Thomas went out?" "Well, no, Danny was with this gorgeous blonde, but they went out together." "Explain that?" "Well, you see, Danny had this great big convertible. Oh, you should have seen it. And he and his gorgeous blonde were in the front, and Alyssa and the little brother were in the back." So there you have it, a double date with Danny Thomas's little brother. So my young friends, if the power ever fails during the holidays and your elders begin to tell stories, be sure to listen up. But grab a salt shaker off the table. You may well need a few grains before the night is done.
One more time for Clay Farris Naff. Family story time is the best time, and it just inspired me to enjoy more of it. Thank you so much for that one, seriously. Up next, it's a tiny tattoo with a meaning. Erin Putney has a tiny tattoo on her left arm, and she's gonna tell the origin story about how and why she got it, what it represents to her, and how it got her past hard days. That tiny tattoo reminds her to laugh, even during the tough moments in life. Please welcome Erin Putney.
I obviously love tattoos. It's no surprise. And these are the ones you can see. There's plenty you can't. And what I love about tattoos is they're unique, they have artistry, but what I really love about them is the stories that they tell. Most people have stories connected to tattoos, whether it's a dumb, drunken night with friends, or it's some memorial to a loved one, or it commemorates a moment in their life and their time. I want to tell you the origin story of the tiniest tattoo that I have. It's not the prettiest, it's not the fanciest, It's definitely not the most expensive. But it's the one that has so much meaning and power for me. Its origin starts in my senior year of high school. And my senior year of high school was a pretty typical senior year of high school at the beginning. I worried about a boyfriend, grades, where I was gonna go to college, what dress I was gonna wear to homecoming. So just pretty typical and normal. The normalcy didn't last long. About November, my mom got diagnosed with cancer. And me being the oops baby, and the one that was much younger than my sisters, was really the only one home anymore. My sisters were older, they had kids, they were off living their own lives, and so I became my mom's caretaker. Now, mind you, in the early months, cancer never left her lips. That word that has such visceral feelings for people never actually left her lips. It was a lump, it was a thickening, it was something the doctors needed to pay attention to. As most cancer journeys start, they start with surgery. We went through the surgical procedure. We laughed a lot because it was breast cancer, and so we laughed about how she would be lopsided and how now she could legitimately stuff her bra. So, but I had to learn how to empty her drain. I had to learn how to watch bandages and take care of things, because those drains kind of down the side. Nice note about those drains is they're much longer in the body than the size of the breast. And when you pull them out during a follow-up appointment, you can turn the loveliest shade of green. But dignity can quickly be restored with some cold water on your face, and hopefully the people in the lobby not noticing that you're walking out pretty pale. So that was surgery. That went pretty smooth, pretty easy. Then came chemotherapy. That's a much different ballgame. I teach my nursing students that chemotherapy is a bomb that we put in your body. And we know that it's gonna get the bad cells, but we also know it's going to get the good ones. And as my mom went through chemotherapy and I went to her chemo treatments, we would praise the nurses that could get IVs on the first start. They would, I mean, man, if I could, I would hand them $100 at this point. But gold stars were usually our measuring stick. We even offered gold stars for the ones that got it on the third or fourth attempt. I can honestly say I am a really good IV start now, but I wasn't at that time. We spent a lot of time in infusion rooms. I would bring homework to try and do and sit on the floor in between all the pumps and stuff. I would try and hide behind the chairs and all that kind of stuff. We would talk about the different hats that people were wearing and the different festivities that things were going on. You would notice when people weren't there because you got used to the patterns of who was there and who wasn't. I would try and focus on homework, but it was hard. And chemo wasn't easy. Unfortunately, my mom had struggled a lot with chemo. I went to a school of 2,000 kids. That's a lot of germs. And I brought home 2,000 kids' germs to my house every day after school. And as my mom's immune system got lower and lower, and I brought home all the germs, she would get sicker and rebound less. At one point, I came home early from a swim meet because I wasn't allowed to go swimming because of the rules of not being able to be there if you missed the practice the day before, and which was fine. And so I went home and I looked at my mom and she was in the recliner, and I knew immediately, just that look, she wasn't doing well. And I put my hand on her and she was so hot. And so my 18-year-old self decided that it was time to take my mom to the hospital, and I took her to the hospital. And this was not the first time we'd been at the hospital, and it definitely wasn't going to be our last. And so, again, we kind of joked with the ER nurses and about whether they would get it on the IV on the first start. They didn't, but they got it on like the third or fourth. We didn't have to call in the anesthesiologist, so we knew they were pretty skilled. Okay, but this one really took her down. I slept in the recliner next to her, and I could see that just the spark wasn't there, right? I mean, we're pretty pasty white people, so we can't say like we were pale, but even more pale than normal. And so she just really struggled. And so one time while she slept, I decided I had a friend come, and she had brought me ant tattoos that were an armband, and from Chuck E. Cheese when that was a thing. And so I was like, while my mom slept, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna cut these apart. And I cut them apart, and then I took off her hat while she slept, and I put ants on her head, right? I didn't put them behind her because no one really likes a kick me sign, so I didn't want to put them back here, but I kind of put them up in the front. And then I slipped her hat back over, and then just kind of waited and just was like, let's see what happens. She got up and had to go to the bathroom, and me being me, I just unplugged all the things and like took her with me. Mind you, I'm 18, and I know how to run IV pumps really well at that point in time. I'm not the nurse's friend. But I take her and we walk her to the bathroom, and there's a mirror right by the bathroom, which is like the worst place for a mirror on a good day, let alone when you're sick. And she looked in the mirror, and she could see the tiny little ants, and she got closer to the mirror, and she got closer, and then she just looked at me in that face of like, what the hell did you just do, right? And she goes, and I go, you got ants. And I'm like, but they're not in your pants, but we got them on your head, right? Like she laughed. She laughed for the first time, right? And all of a sudden, there was just a little bit more spark there, right? There was just a little bit more energy in the room that day. We got her back to the bed, got her there, and then the nurse came in, and my mom pulled up her hat, and she goes, look at what my daughter did to me. She put ants on my head. And the nurse laughed. She showed, during that hospital trip, she showed everything. She showed everybody all the ants, right? Every time, I think even the phlebotomist at like 4 a.m. when they come and draw your blood, she was like, look at what my daughter did, right? And it changed the mood, right? It just tilted it just a little bit, just to give us a little bit of that spark back, right? So the tattoo that I have, of course, is an ant. It's the tiniest ant. Now, in amongst this tattoo, obviously there's lots, but there's the 3 women that raised me. There's my grandma, Young, who is daisies for the amazing compassion that she taught me to have. The ruffled feather for my grandma, Ray Hope, who taught me to be a fierce advocate and nothing happens sitting down. And then the tiniest little ant, just to remind us, it didn't stop the hurt from happening. It didn't make the chemo work better. It didn't make us get better through the radiation. It didn't take away the challenges of me having to learn to give my mom injections. But it lifted a little bit off our shoulders. It taught us to remember to laugh, and just gave us a little bit of a breath during some of the really hard moments of our life. Thank you.
Something that Erin didn't share is that her mom, Pat, is actually right here. Pat, could you stand up and wave to everyone, please? Are there any other cancer survivors in the house? Could you please stand and be recognized? And those affected by cancer, a round of applause, please. These are Nebraskan stories, all of them. I like these stories so far. How about you? Y'all like these stories? Oh, friends, can we just get one more round of applause for our storytellers tonight? My goodness, these impactful stories, these true stories, the one that make us feel like we are all Nebraska. I was just talking to someone, we were just saying that this feels like a family, right? We each are storytellers. Even if we're not on this stage, we all tell stories to each other. I mean, how many of you just shared stories right now? Right? We are all storytellers, and this festival is to celebrate each and every one of us through the lenses of a few Nebraskans who can share their stories openly and transparently. So we really want to say a big thank you to our speakers tonight. Our next amazing speaker is Joe Starita. He's telling a story about the death of White Buffalo Girl, a baby girl who died when Chief Standing Bear and the Ponca tribe were being forcibly marched from their beloved Niobrara homeland all the way to Oklahoma. The Ponca begged the white citizens of Neely, Nebraska to take care for White Buffalo Girl as though she was one of their own. Those citizens promised to do so and have kept that very promise for 147 years. How death brought a community to life. Welcome, Joe Starita.
One of my favorite writers, the brilliant Kentucky poet and essayist Wendell Berry, once observed, "If you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are. If you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are." I have long admired the genius behind being able to deliver that complex concept in 13 words, and the power behind those words. The power behind those words. Geography and identity carry the same amount of DNA. All these tributaries, the country you were born in, the place you were born in, the state you were born in, the city in that state, the part of the city you were born in, the neighborhood, all of these tributaries that flow into creating the narrative river of the self. If you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are. Nobody understood that concept better than Chief Standing Bear and his 750 Ponca people, a people who had lived along the Niobrara River in the northeast corner of Nebraska, this beautiful homeland, for more than 200 years, transforming the valleys into lush fields of wheat and corn and pumpkins and squash. They knew all the trees, the rocks, the most intricate stone formations, the deepest catfishing holes in the river, and most importantly, the 7 sacred burial sites hidden within the white chalk bluffs overlooking the Missouri River. If you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are. So imagine the horror, the anger, the outrage, the shock on a cold January day in 1877 when Standing Bear and 750 Ponca people were camped in their winter village along the Niobrara, and a strange white man showed up in their village. From, of all places, the Upper East Side of New York, a white man who knew absolutely nothing about Native Americans specifically and the Ponca in general. And he came to tell them that the Great White Father back east wanted Standing Bear and all of his Ponca people to pack up as soon as they can, bring whatever belongings they could carry, and start walking from their beloved homeland near the South Dakota-Nebraska border to the Indian Territory, more than 550 miles, to a place that would become the state of Oklahoma. Now, we all know, instinctively and otherwise, that no Nebraskan is moving to Oklahoma. Not now, not then, not ever. And that is what Chief Standing Bear and White Eagle conveyed to this strange white man from the East Coast. They were not going anywhere. This was their homeland. For 200 years, not one Senate treaty, but 2 Senate treaties said they were the legal occupiers. How dare you try and kick us off our own land? The government didn't budge. They waited for the winter to calm down. In early spring, they sent a cavalry detachment to the Ponca village, their beloved homeland, and they encircled the village. And shortly after arriving, they cut off all the food. And shortly after that, they cut off all the water. And shortly after that, many of the elders in the tribe and many of the young began to weaken rapidly and were near death. The primary obligation of every chief was the welfare of his people. So Standing Bear and White Eagle and the others had no choice but to begin walking 550 miles from their beloved homeland to a place that would become Oklahoma. It had been an extraordinarily cold, damp, wet spring with some snow in April and even early May, so they couldn't leave until May 19th, 1877, when they broke camp early that morning. It had rained all night, poured all night. It had slowed to a drizzle. The cavalry, with bayonets to their backs, started moving them in the first few steps of a 550-mile journey. It rained all the next day, the 15th and the 16th. And finally, on the 19th, they got to the outskirts of Neely, Nebraska, and they pitched their camp along the Elkhorn River, where it poured all night, and a 2-hour cloudburst the morning of May 23rd opened up. And about the middle of that morning, May 23rd, 1877, a little baby girl, 18 months old, who had been lying on the floor of a cheap, damp Army canvas tent, died of pneumonia. Her mother was so devastated, was so crushed, that she held White Buffalo Girl to her breast, sobbing uncontrollably all morning. When the father came in and tried to gently remove the dead child from her arms, she pushed him away and just kept crying and kept crying. And finally, the father went to the head of the cavalry unit and begged him to go into the community of Neely and to see if they could find the town carpenter and to see if he could build a tiny wooden casket and a tiny wooden cross, and if they could have permission to bury White Buffalo Girl in the Neely Cemetery before their orders were to break camp and continue to march out the next day. So they went into the village. They found the carpenter. He built a tiny wooden coffin. He built a tiny wooden cross. And the next afternoon, on the highest hill of the Laurel Hill Cemetery, virtually the entire community of Neely came out in a steady drizzle to bury White Buffalo Girl. And after she was buried, Black Elk, through an interpreter, begged the community of Neely to care for his dead baby daughter as though she were one of their own. A promise that the village of Neely has kept for 147 years. I first went to this grave about 10 years ago when I was doing research up on the Niobrara River. I was driving back to Lincoln, and I just decided I had to see this grave. It was late at night, about 10:30, 10:45, mid-September, beautiful fall evening. And I knew exactly where to go in this cemetery that swept over 3 hills high above the Elkhorn River that contained more than 2,000 graves. because the president of the Antelope County Historical Society had given me specific instructions where White Buffalo Girl's grave was. So I pulled in about 10:30, quarter to 11, beautiful autumn evening, completely dark, except for a full moon that was lighting the way. It was an easy grave to follow. I parked the car just inside the gates, turned right, kept walking, and there I saw it. The headstone over 125 years old, and this grave bathed in just this sweeping carpet of moonlight, and covering the entire grave were all of these little teddy bears and colored bunnies and little ducks and chickens and blankets and flowers and quarters and tobacco and sage, spiritual and holy elements left by the native people who came to visit the grave. And I just stood there, all alone in the dark, in the moonlight, looking at this grave and reimagining what this mother felt, what these people felt, this whole story, and the promise that this village had made and had kept. And it brought me to tears, standing there that night. And people still come to this gravesite all the time. On Mother's Day, mothers from around the Neely area bring their young daughters to the grave of White Buffalo Girl, and they tell them the story of a community that used its open hearts and kindness to overcome death and despair. A story that can still happen right now, right here, anywhere, if we'll only let it.
One more time for Joe Starita. I love how at the end he said these stories can still happen. These are stories that we're talking about. And these stories are things that continue. They're moments in life, they're moments in time, parts of Nebraska history that have to be told, that have to be passed down, and parts that have to be continued. So thank you for sharing your story. We really appreciate it. You ever have that high school coach that you just have a story about? Whether you played a sport or it was that teacher, that was like your DECA coach or something. You got a story about that trip that y'all took that one time. You know that one time that I'm talking about. Our next storyteller was a high school football coach, riding home late at night with the team in tow on a bus when something happened that you really would only see in movies. This one night on a bus, welcome Derrick Pearson.
Thank you all. I'm going to take you outside of the state of Nebraska for a moment. I've been, in a previous life, I was a high school coach. I was known as Coach DP. DP, that's just what, hey Coach DP. I currently live here in Lincoln, Nebraska. Some of you will hear me on the radio, and I get to talk, and I get to bring some of those coaching memories forward for lessons. So, I hope you're ready to go on a ride. Some of you back in 1994 will remember the movie Speed, and the great late Dennis Hopper came up with this line, pop quiz, hotshot. You're on a bus. Well, I'm about to give you a sentence that I don't think anybody else in this room can copy. I'm on my bus with my football team in Utah, riding down the side of a mountain with no brakes, and the bus is on fire. Yeah. As we go through it, I just want to paint the picture. Coaching in Utah was different. I happened to coach at a Christian academy in Utah. Now, that's a story for another year. But because of the size of the school, sometimes we would take these 3, 4, 5-hour bus rides just to get competition. And one of these nights, 4 hours in, we get the win. Excellent. But those rides back with high school teenagers, it's a little different. And they're usually fatigued and they go to sleep. They crash. And for those of you that have teenagers, you know what it's like to deal with sleeping teenagers. The adults, the coaches are up front, and some of them have fallen asleep. And you're kind of dozing until you hear horns blowing. And you snap to and gather yourself. Nothing prepared me for what I was about to hear. Because driving next to us, there are people in a car, windows open, and they're yelling. They're yelling at us. Lower the window. Sir? Your bus is on fire. I look at my buddy Lyle. Did he just say the bus is on fire? Yeah. Bus driver, sir, did you hear this guy? Yeah, I heard him. We move up to whisper. What's going on? He goes, yeah, bus is on fire. And that's not the real problem here. There's a bigger issue. Bigger issue, sir. Shane, said driver. Shane, what's the bigger problem? We don't have any brakes. Now, Parley's Canyon, you think Salt Lake Olympics, winter, Park City, top of the state, all the mountains. We have to get from the top of the mountain to the valley in Salt Lake City on a bus that's on fire with no brakes. Now, I need to concede something to you. I'm afraid of heights. When me and my wife go on road trips, we have to talk it through. Sometimes if we're gonna be on the side of a mountain and I have to talk it through. Like, listen, now a coach in Utah, grow up, there are mountains. You're gonna have to deal with them. Except I wasn't prepared. The cars start to peel off because, hey, the bus is on fire and it doesn't have any brakes. And the hill, this is kind of how this goes. And every turn, my hand sweats a little more. My voice starts to waver. And then you realize, Coach, you have kids on this bus. What are you gonna do? Now, go back, I said, Christian school, we know how to pray. Got it down. We knew which prayer to go to. We knew who was gonna lead it. And then as you're getting through the prayer, then you have to make a decision. We're in trouble. And they said, well, on sometimes these roads, sometimes they have these gravel exits, except for we're going too fast and there are too many cars on the road with us who are trying to avoid us at all costs. And they are peeling off like, listen, they were heroes a minute ago. Hey, your bus is on fire, but we're out of here. Like, this is not gonna end well, so deuces. Shane looks at us and says, look, we have one last hope. At the bottom of the hill, the very thing that you come to, it is a sharp right turn. Sharp right turn. And it goes slightly uphill, so we might have a shot. Now, Shane has been pumping these brake pads for as long as he could, and we're afraid. You have to wake the kids up. Now, parents, imagine trying to wake your sons and daughters up out of a full, deep fatigued sleep with words that have to communicate this urgent message that I'm about to deliver. Malik, I need your attention. Don't panic. But the bus is on fire, and we don't have brakes. Now, as my captain, we need for you to get everybody on one side of the bus. Now. Now, we make the, again, second prayer in full, out loud. We get to the bottom of the hill. Problem. At the bottom of the hill, there are two stoplights. You're hoping they're green. It's gonna get interesting if it's not green. It's already interesting, but it's gonna get more interesting if it's not green. If they're both not green. And you hope on a Friday night in Salt Lake City that there's no traffic at 1 o'clock in the morning. Thank you, Mormon folks, for being home. Appreciate it. I appreciate you being home. We make the turn, full ramp up the hill, turn it, and then we realize there's another problem. We're gonna make the stop, which is good, except this bus on fire has come to a complete halt right in front of a gas station. I'm old. I was younger then, but I'm old now. I was fast. I have never in my athletic career moved as fast as I did in gathering students and coaches and getting them off a bus and as far away from this gas station and the fire as possible. We made it off the bus. Sitting on the curb, I snapped some pictures just because people weren't going to believe that this thing happened, that I was on a bus going downhill that was on fire with no brakes. By the time they put the fire out, I get home, I sit on my bed, and I just gather myself. I just gather myself because I've had quite the evening. And I turn on my TV, as I'm prone to do, and what do I hear on the television? Pop quiz, hotshot. You're on a bus. My wife will tell you, I'm quick with a remote. I have never turned off a TV as quickly as I did that night and took the longest shower in history to wash it all off. If anybody ever says to you, where there's smoke, there's fire, let's hope that it's not a bus and your brakes are working. Thank you.
One more time for Derrick Pearson. That just kind of, you just imagining it, and I'm not a parent, so if you're a parent, I just know that in your head it's a little worse than it is for me, but I'm just like, man, if my coach ever said that to me, I would lose it. Thank you for sharing that story, really appreciate it. Up next, we have a story from Margaret Johns. Yeah, I like the Margaret fan club. It's called, I Should Have Sat on the Wicker Chair. In her story, Margaret talks about making a wrong decision, surviving an almost 100-pound tree limb falling directly on top of her head, and then living to tell the story. Please give a big round of applause for Margaret Johns.
A lot of tall people here.
There was a torrential rainstorm the night before. The house was rocking, the wind was blowing, there were sheets of rain falling on the house, and I was cozy in my bed. The next day, as the sunlight shined in my eye, I thought it would be great to go and have my cup of joe and go watch my backyard chicken flock in my backyard. So I made my French roast, fresh ground, organic, French pressed coffee, gathered my stuff, and went outside. When I walk out the door, to my left is my old wicker chair where I always sit, and it fits like an old shoe. To my right is this cool tree swing hanging on the tree. And I heard this little voice say, "You should sit in the wicker chair." So I walked to the swing and sat down on the swing. When I sat down, I forgot about the rain. There was a cushion, and it was squishy, and it was wet, and it was oozing, and I was, and I just kept sitting there. And I heard, "You should go sit in the wicker chair again." And I just kept swinging, in the humidity, cool cushions on your derriere will be very cooling. So I just kept sitting there, watching my backyard flock of chicken. They're very cute, too. One of them's name was Gonzo, and he looked just like Gonzo. He was wild. Okay, so there I am sitting in my chair. I have my Bible and I have my cup of joe, and I'm watching the flock of chicken, and I step back, and I take a little swing, and I hear a little bit of a creaking noise. And I'm watching the backyard flock of chicken, and I swing back again, and I swing forward, and another creaking. And I heard, "You should go sit in the wicker chair." So I swang back one more time, and 1 second, I let go, and I heard a man's voice from the left side yelling, "No!" And as soon as I heard that, the tree limb fell on my head, and I closed my eyes for a second. And I woke up. They say if you close your eyes for a second, you don't know how long you've been out. You could have been out for half an hour, 10 minutes, or 1 second. And I'm laying on, and I'm looking up, and I'm like, why is the tree above me like that? And I can't move, and I realize I can't move. Oh, in my head, I started to realize, oh, my head hurts, what is it? And I was like stuck there. And I was trying to figure out, how am I supposed to get out of this? And I thought, I heard, "Check your body limbs." So I was like laying there, and my feet were straight up in the air. I was still in the bench. I can move everything. And then I checked my neck. I could move my neck. And I was like, how am I gonna get out of this? And I'm like in pain and agony. And I got this brilliant idea to do a backwards somersault. So I ever so slowly, like a sloth, slowly never moved that slow in my life. But I didn't know if there was something wrong with me, so I was trying to be really clever and careful. So I stood up, and my head was hurting, and I heard, "What is that next to you?" And I look to my right, and there's the tree limb hanging on an electrical wire connected to my house. And I heard that voice say, "You need to get that wire and that tree off of that wire, or else you're gonna be electrocuted to death." So I was struggling. Now, this tree limb weighed almost 100 pounds, plus my, at the time, 210 pounds, the tree swing, and then the sopping wet cushion. So whatever the math is, that's all this weight. So here I am and I'm in pain, and I'm trying to struggle, lift this thing up. I can't unhook it from the wire. And I started to yell for my brother. Well, first I heard, where's the man that was yelling no? And I was looking, like, nobody's there. No neighbor, nobody. And I was like yelling for my brother, who was sitting inside watching TV. I think it took about a half an hour for him to hear me. And he came to the door and he yelled, what do you want? And my dad, who was living with us at the time, he had dementia, so he was there. And they were both just standing there. My brother came out, my dad, who is a superhero dad, who came to rescue me for everything and anything, like picking me up. Hey there. Came and picked me up, and like if I needed to be picked up for the movies, or if something happened, my dad was always there. As an adult, he would come visit me. So here's my dad, and he's not running to help me. And that second that I was standing there, I realized, one, that I had survived this tree limb falling on my head, and two, that was no longer my dad. And I realized that my superhero dad wasn't gonna come and rescue me anymore. So I had my mom in the back of my head where she was telling me, calm down, because she's like this very calming person in a way, but she's also very kind of bossy also. So it was like a bossy calm down. So I was like, oh, I have to calm down. So I calmed down enough to explain to my brother what was happening. Now, I need to explain to you about my dad. My dad being the superhero, this is very new to me to depend on my brother. So my dad, he was a prayer warrior who prayed protection over us kids. And he was also a black belt in Kempo. And so, he had his teacher, Welf Castro, who had his dojo in San Francisco. This was during the earlier 60s. And he was really, his teacher was very good friends with Bruce Lee. So when my dad would practice, Bruce Lee would come into the dojo, and Ralph Castro would say, line up. And so all the men would line up best in front to the not so good in the back. And my dad was always in the front. So I always thought it was really cool that Bruce Lee watched my dad do his Kempo and stuff. I wasn't born yet, but okay, back to the story. So here I am having to explain to my brother how to get this tree limb unhooked from the wire before it electrocutes me, and we worked it out. And I'm crying uncontrollably though, of course, trying to calm down. My mom's like, calm down, calm down. There's no calming down when you survive a tree limb falling on your head. So at that time, I called my daughter to come and get me, to take me to the emergency room, and she's like the calm in the storm. And she takes me to the ER, and she helps me get through that situation. And I'm really thankful for her for being able to for me to be able to call her and come and help me do that. So I did suffer a brain concussion, and I lost the ability to read, to write. I couldn't remember people's names. I still can't remember people's names. I do remember faces. I have to reread sentences over and over and over and ask myself, what's the subject? What's the noun? And then I still have to read it over and over. However, I can, get it better than when I first had my head injury. So I had to do a lot of PT, speech therapy, and counseling for the PTSD that I have from this, and I couldn't walk under trees for a long time. It was awful. It was really scary, and I'm in continuous pain. So my neck, I have 2 neck degenerates as a result also, and so it's sitting, I can't sit for very long, I can't really drive very long. So there's a lot of stuff that I have to deal with. But I'm very thankful to be alive. And I'm thankful to God that I'm alive. And after that happened, we had a tree limb service come to cut this 3-story tree down in the front of my mom's house. And the tree people, they had one guy who was the boss, so I was talking to him, and I was telling him this story about what happened. And he said, "How are you still alive? How are you talking to me? That's a miracle that you're still alive." He said, "Those are called widow makers. I just cannot believe that you're still alive." I had walked him in the backyard to show him the tree limb, and he couldn't believe it. And I asked him, and he said it was, about 80 to 100 pounds. My dad says it was 100 pounds. He was also a fisherman from Alaska, so I was like, okay, so I'm gonna say almost 100 pounds. It does sound better. Maybe a year from now I might say 120, I don't know. But for right now, it's, almost 100 pounds. It's like that $1.99, or, it's not $2, it's, okay. So, okay, so I often think about that voice that I heard with the man yelling, "No," and telling me I should sit in the wicker chair. And I don't know. There's several things I can think of. One, it was my guardian angel. 2, it was the Holy Spirit. 3, it was actually the neighbor, and, But I know my neighbor's voices, and that wasn't his voice. And 4, I think and I believe in my heart that it was an intercessory prayer, like my dad, who was a prayer warrior, someone like him who maybe had a vision of me and yelled no right 1 second before the tree limb fell on my head. Thus, I'm alive and live to tell. And so I'll never know until I graduate and go to heaven, and I can sit and ask Jesus, okay, so this is what happened. And I'm sure he'll tell me. And, well, I'm on the subject of trees. I did look in the Bible and started realizing how many stories there are in the Bible about the tree of life, tree of good and evil, all that. The burning tree, the ark was made out of tree, all sorts of things. Abraham, there's like stuff with Abraham with a tree. There's Jesus died on a tree. I mean, I don't know why or how or why I connect that to it, but I do. But one of the things, there's so many things to be thankful for. I'm thankful because it changed me, even though I went through a lot of pain and I would prefer not to have it, but I became a much kinder person and more patient. And I see people differently, and I sometimes I see the beauty in everyone, like all of you are beautiful. And then sometimes I see things like in people that they need to work on. Of course, that's hard to deal with sometimes, but I'm thankful for that too, because I know what to pray for. Well, one of the things that I think about is, well, my dad, he did pass away, and he always prayed for me and would always tell me, "Margaret, I just want you to get to a point where you're not controlled by the outer things in the world, and that you have peace in your heart, and that you don't lose control over yourself." So I feel like, the game of Candyland, when you get on the right spot and you project way up in the front and you're in front of all the people, and so you are fast forward 30 paces. So I feel like that's what happened with me as a result of this, because of the patience, and I also have a zest for life too, because of, when you face death like that, it's you are very thankful. So there's one other thing. I received prayer from people, like my brothers and sisters in the Lord, and some of them are here. a lot of people prayed for me, and sometimes I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll do the courtesy. Yes, you can pray for me. But sometimes prayer miracles do happen, and I did have a miracle happen. I used to be in a constant 7 or 8 pain level, and I was prayed for by a young man, and he had word of knowledge, and he said, "You're gonna have a radical healing tonight." And I didn't believe him at first, and I was like, what? Well, when he prayed for me, I used to not be able to move my neck. I used to be like this, and now I can move it like this. So if you have people coming up to you and asking you to pray, let them pray for you, because you never know who is going to be the miracle that God's going to pull out or land a miracle on you. And so let people, pray for you. If you don't believe, I honor whatever your belief is, but this is my plea that it's just crazy. And my other thing I'd like to say is please trim your trees. And I should have sat in the wicker chair.
That was awesome. Nice job. You did great. One more round of applause for Margaret Johns. We've all had that voice. Should have sat in the wicker chair, shouldn't make that drive, shouldn't call that person, shouldn't have that conversation. How many of us have been like, I'm gonna do it anyway? Yeah, quite a few of us. Margaret, you're not alone. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Next, we have a duo of storytellers. I am so excited to introduce you to Michaella, Kumke, and Alynn Sampson. Their relationship has had some hurdles and a few bumps here and there. It's honestly could be like a whole movie. It was a work in progress that was formed out of experience, trust, and a commitment to a shared sense of purpose and service. Through their work, and over the years, they formed a special friendship and a fierce support for one another's success, coming together of a feeler and a thinker. Please welcome Michaella Kumke and Alynn Sampson.
Thank you. Oh, do you want this? Like a boss. Wow. I had visions of tossing that over. I started at the food bank in 2008. I didn't know much about the food bank, but I thought, feeding children, what a great job. I know that's probably confusing to some people who know me as a parent and think, you love children? But I do, in a way. I thought, okay, I know that children are the most vulnerable when we think about our population. They have the least amount of say as far as how resources get shared, how bills get paid. They don't get a say of if food is on the table or if food is not on the table. So for me, it was a social justice issue. Coming in with a social work background, it seemed like the perfect fit. And it was. Things were great. I loved this job. We were able to feed families, kids, as schools would tell stories about hungry children showing up to school. My answer was always absolutely yes. And John Mabry, who's here, our development director, I had a famous line of, "Can't you just ask for more?" Because I thought it was just that easy to get more money so that we could feed more kids. We had a great leader at that time, Scott Young, and things were great. We were coming up with innovative ways to feed more families. I loved the work that we did, and I really was hungry for more. And in 2015, everything changed for me.
It was February 2015 when I started at the food bank. And my family had just buried my dad a couple months prior, and that was a complicated relationship, but my dad gave me 2 really good pieces of advice. He said, choose a job that gives you meaning, and no job is worth making yourself sick over. And when I started at the food bank, I knew right away I had found my place. I loved the people, I loved the work. I had also known some people growing up who I loved and cared about who needed food. It was personal, and I felt connected instantly. There was just one problem: her. So, quick show of hands, how many of you are familiar with the Myers-Briggs type indicator? Great. Okay, so in one area of decision making, you're either identified as a feeler or a thinker. So if you know this, will my thinkers please show their hands? Okay, and you feelers? Tough crowd for you, Sampson.
Yeah, that's a bit disappointing.
So Alynn and I we have a lot of similarities. We're both determined, we're both very caring, we're stubborn, and committed. But for all of those similarities, for some reason, this thinker-feeler thing kept dividing us. And it became painfully obvious to me that this feeler did not care for that thinker. And that thinker did not care for this feeler.
That is accurate. I am a thinker, and I thought, this feeler over here sure wants to talk a lot about feelings. Sure wants to find meanings in everything that we're doing, talk about flowery things, and clearly she didn't know me because that's nonsense. We don't do that. We have a job to do. We need to be strategic. And there's just no time for feelings. And so I kept my distance. I made sure to let Michaella know that's not how I roll, and that's not how I think the food bank should roll either. And I've been here a long time, and it's my way. And I made sure that we kept that distance for years.
Years. At
Years.
least 5 years, yeah. A lot of years. But then, and to be fair, I am a one-upper. We all have our insecurities. When I get insecure, and Alynn is intimidating, so I would find myself being insecure a lot around her, I would try to one-up and prove myself, and it came out. It's not a pretty thing, but it's human. And
I would make sure that Michaella knew, you don't know the history of the food bank. I would cut her off in meetings. I would definitely be a little catty. And just made sure if there was information that would be helpful for Michaella,
I
would make sure she wouldn't get it. Very helpful.
So this was real workplace conflict, real mean girl bullshit. And it kept going on. And I had had enough because it hurt. It really hurt.
It's true. And I think what really was a pivotal moment is we had to really stop and realize, as we were being catty, as we were one-upping and cutting each other off, people were not getting fed.
Not to the best of our ability.
We knew we could be better. And so
it was time?
It was time for Michaella. She definitely felt, okay, I've got to tell her how I feel. But there was a tipping point for you.
Yeah, there was.
And
yeah, there was.
I think the best fact is we're great friends. And I just found out this tipping point as we were in this process.
So, you make friends at work. You like each other's social media pages, and then you see some posts, like a picture of Alynn with a couple of colleagues on a chilly day, and they're all wearing vests, so cute, with the line, "Work besties," which was fine. It was fine.
It was a
and
good
it
one.
seemed so small, right? Like, not a big deal. Except I had also come to work that day wearing a vest. And it was not a mistake that I was uninvited or not included in that photo. And I knew it. I felt it. And I thought about my dad, and I thought, one, I'm stubborn. I love this job. I am supposed to be here. But I am not going to let my mental health or a bully get in the way of it. So it was time to have a serious conversation.
Yeah. So here comes Michaella down the hall, pulls me aside and says, "Hey, could I talk to you a minute in the conference room?" And I thought, okay, here we go. She's gonna want to talk about something that I'm not gonna want to talk about. So we went into our conference room and she laid it out and said, "This is bullshit. We cannot keep going like this. We cannot do this. And here's what it feels like." And she laid out her feelings that I had made her feel unwelcome from day one. This is now 2019. That I really have hurt her feelings, and we are so much better than what was happening. And it was in that moment that I had to make a choice. That I could either continue on and ignore this and say, "No, everything's great, this is fine," or really own that moment to say, "Okay, thinker, dig deep here because it's time to be vulnerable," and accept that I have hurt someone. And I think for me, that was the moment that it wasn't my direct intention to hurt someone. And I knew that we could feed better if we could just figure this out, and we couldn't keep going. So we laid it out and thought, okay, let's just start over. I knew that I needed Michaella. She was our communications director. We were starting a new initiative, and deep down I knew I would not be able to relay the message of what this work meant without the feelings. And I needed her words, I needed her expertise, and I knew she had to be at the table for that. So we thought, well, let's go to this conference together and learn about how to serve neighbors better. And you know what? Let's drive. It's only 8 hours. Let's take a road trip. Let's get in the car for 8 hours. We can't escape, and continue to hash this out. And so we did.
But why stop there?
Oh, why stop there? You're right. Let's rent an Airbnb. Why would we stay in a separate hotel room? Let's do an Airbnb. Let's get a hot tub. Let's really knock this out.
We committed.
We did commit. And so we spent 8 hours in that car. We laughed. We ate.
We say it.
There may have been
cried.
a
We
few
cried.
tears that were shed. A few, you know. And for the first time since 2015, we got to know each other. We got to learn about each other's families. We got to learn why we were in this work. We never even talked about, why does this matter? Why are we here? And it completely changed our relationship. And so we did this conference, we stayed in the Airbnb, and we came back and agreed, okay, we can do this.
And the timing was perfect because then a pandemic hit. And the food bank, in order to continue to serve our neighbors and keep ensuring access to food, we got into kind of the situation room and decided, our leadership came out. And we determined that we were gonna need to break up our staff into a work from home team and then 2 teams that would alternate coming in and doing the service. And for all this time in the history, it had been, you're either Team Alynn or you're Team Michaella. Except this time, we were in sync. And it was, again, Team Alynn and Team Michaella, but we had each other's backs. And our team needed us, our teams and our team needed us to show up and be together, support each other, and we got it done. And it was a horrible.
It was horrible. I guess we're leaving it at that. It was horrible. It was horrible.
It was a horrible, wonderful, magical. Should I keep getting
Here we go. Yes, keep the, yes. Felt wonderful.
We survived it, and our team grew stronger. People got fed, and a record number of people got fed. And I learned, thanks. It made us closer. I appreciated things about Alynn that I had never seen before. She backed me in situations where I needed her. And she is so badass.
And so here we are. We made it out of that awful situation as friends, as colleagues. The greatest outcome, Michaella is now the president and CEO of the food bank.
Alynn leads Matt Talbot Kitchen and Outreach.
So we are these badass women leading two organizations, very similar missions, but still support each other. And I think that is a community win.
I feel like she's right.
I just hear these stories, and I keep thinking to myself, this gotta be a movie. Like, we need like a Nebraska movie series. Like, that story right there is something that you see on the big screen about two business owners in LA duking it out, trying to figure. This is at the food bank. I need a food bank movie, you know what I'm saying? Friends, we have a couple of more stories for you tonight here at the Nebraska Storytelling Festival. We really appreciate you coming out. This next one is honestly gonna touch your heart and leave your eyes wide open. This is Sam Stecher. He wanted to be a father at 22, but it didn't happen until he was 42. He now lives every moment making up for the 20 years of not being a dad. And although parenting can be a struggle, one day, his 4-year-old said 5 words and let him know he was doing just fine. A small thing that matters. Please welcome to the stage, Sam Stecher.
What's a small thing you do that matters? I ask this of people with a meaningful amount of frequency. I ask because I'm authentically interested. I ask because I want to validate the good that they do. And honestly, I ask because I want the opportunity to tell my own story. I wanted to be a dad at 22 and I became one at 42. And the reasons around that are not part of this story tonight. What's important for tonight is that you understand my math. I wanted to be a dad at 22 and I became one at 42, which means I live every day like I'm trying to make up for 20 years of lost fatherhood. That is not a logical outcome to that equation, but I've never been one to let math get in between me and my truth. My own father had a rule, the belly button rule. That rule being he would carry you to bed as long as you were not taller than his belly button. And when this rule was applied to my younger brother and I, my father was a farmer and a laborer, and I like to think that after a day of working the livestock in the fields and the dairy and the meatpacking plant, carrying his sons to bed was the last of the day's labors, but I know often that wasn't true and there was more work to come. And actually, I can't remember the belly button rule being applied to me, but I distinctly remember my younger brother being measured against my father's stomach before bedtime. And then one day, he exceeded that height threshold. And my dad simply said, "Son, looks like you're walking up." And my brother did, without question, without protest, just accepting this rite of passage, ascending something far more significant than just that set of stairs. Have you guys ever seen that meme? We tend to tell stories in memes now. And it says, do you realize there was a day that your parents put you down and never picked you back up again? When I read that, I had a little bit different take. I thought, I was a college wrestler. This is gonna happen way later in life for my kids. For the longest time, I actually had a habit of picking up my friends. And not just picking up my friends, I would sneak behind them and I would grab them around the waist like this, and I'd pick them up and shake them upside down a little bit, and then put them back on their feet. That's how I express my love. My wife this year just has forbidden me from doing this any longer. I protested. I said, no, I am still more than physically capable of this stunt. Honestly, the best compliment I've ever received, I did this to my buddy Jay once. He is north of 6 feet and north of 300 pounds. And someone took a picture, and another one of my friends saw the picture and said, that looks photoshopped. That's the compliment. But anyway, my wife said, I can't do this anymore. And I said, I can still do this. And she said, no, it's not about you. Your friends are all getting old too. And they all have the hidden maladies of age. And it's not a gesture of affection when you pick Scott up and throw his back out. What's a small thing you do every day that matters? Ezra, my 6-year-old, is his own boy. He is a runner and an artist and a swimmer, and I am none of these things. The path to his heart is loud and wide and free of obstacles, and he gets all of these from his mom, and I love them both more for its manifestation in my firstborn. Ezra, hoisting people is not in his nature. He did not get that line of genetic code from his father. He only recently realized he can pick up Jack, our 2-year-old, and then he'll do so awkwardly like, I guess I can do this? But every day, Ezra asks me to pick him up, and I do, and it matters. This happens most often at bedtime. There is no belly button rule in my house, and there never will be. So I will say, Ezra, time for bed. And he'll go, Dad, will you pick me up? And I say, yes. And then he goes, will you carry me upside down? He has no idea of my affinity to turn what I love topsy-turvy, but I do it. When he was 4, I was carrying him upstairs, and I said, Ezra, what are we going to do when you are too big for me to carry? And unknowingly, I asked a loaded question. At 49 years old, with a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, I am the definition of old dad. Ezra recently, while he was brushing his teeth, said, Dad, did you know you're way older than all my friends' dads? And I said, yeah, does that bother you? And he goes, no, I think it's awesome. You're going to be the first dad to turn 100. But when I say, Ezra, what are we going to do when you are too big for me to carry? I know I'm on the clock, and so much of my persona has been wrapped up in my own physicality, and I hear that ticking down. But when I say, Ezra, what are we going to do when you are too big for me to carry? He said, that's when I'll carry you. I have never been more certain we were raising a good one. Dad, that's when I'll carry you, because I know right now I pick him up with ease and with joy, and someday roles are going to switch, and I know that I can't expect my son to pick me up with ease and joy. When that dynamic flips from father and son, it is not about ease and joy, but I know he will. Because the path to his heart is loud and wide and free of obstacles, and he got that from his mom. Jack, my 2-year-old, last month, he's just figuring sentences out. Sometimes he looks at me and he goes, pick me up. Sometimes he looks at me and goes, pick you up. Means the same thing. But it was bedtime, and I said, Jack, bedtime, and he goes, pick me up. And I said, yes. And then he goes, carry me upside down. And I said, yes. Because it's a small thing I do, but it matters. And I know everybody in here every day is doing small things that still matter. And we are all storytellers here tonight. and we are all listeners to stories. And I ask you to do that. Make sure you ask somebody tonight, hey, what is a small thing you do that matters? And have the courage to tell that story. Thank you.
Sam Stecher, one more round of applause, please. Oh my gosh, I'm not even a parent. Sam. Our last story of the second annual Nebraska Storytelling Festival comes from none other than Kevin Shinn. Despite our past, we hold each other, we each hold the power to be a hinge and swing the future for the next generation into a better direction. Kevin shares his personal story about someone who was a hinge in his life. The hinge on which a future swings. Please welcome to the stage our final storyteller, Kevin Shinn.
Here's a list of 5 words. See if you can tell what they have in common. Dad, Pa, Pops, Ray, monkey on my back. They're all 5 words that can be used in reference to a father. I would guess most of us use the first word, Dad, but the last 2 are how my father referred to his father. His biological father, he referred to as Ray, not his stepfather. And at the end of Ray's life, he said, son, I feel like a monkey is off my back. Why would he say that? Well, I'm going to give you some insight into why. My dad was born in 1930 in the era of the Great Depression. Ray owned a car repair shop in Caney, Kansas. And the bank foreclosed on him when he could not keep up with his bills. And so he, like a lot of other Oklahomans, had to move west to try to find some work. So Ray packed up the family and got all the way to Gila Bend, Arizona, where Ray found work as a mechanic. Dad didn't talk much about that season of his life, but occasionally he would say to me, son, I hope you never have to go to bed hungry. And I didn't know fully what that meant. I could only infer that those were very, very difficult times for him. And I think it was this knowledge of hunger that led him into his love of food. Oh, and did I tell you I'm a chef? Funny how that works, isn't it? How that influence works. Dad told a story. Ray took him to a shoe store one time to get shoes for school. The clerk brings out 3 boxes, and my dad takes the very first pair that he tries on, even though they did not fit. I said, Dad, why would you do that? He said, I was so afraid of Ray's anger that if I said they didn't fit, he might accuse me of complaining, and then in rage escort me out the shoe store, and I wouldn't get any shoes at all. I was a teenager in Ray's twilight years, and he lived in a nursing home about 2 hours away from where we lived, and occasionally we would go see him on the weekend. And I remember this one visit very clearly. We were in his room, and suddenly Ray got upset about something, got a little belligerent, starts swearing at my dad. And Dad looked at us and said, "Kids, you go get in the car." And he turned and said, "Ray, you are not going to talk to me that way. We're leaving now." And he turned and walked out the room. I was in college when I got the phone call saying Ray had passed. And after Ray's funeral, that's when my dad said, "Son, I feel like a monkey is off my back." And that's when it clicked. That's why he would not use a term of endearment for the man that raised him. Yeah, he would call him Ray. He was raised by an abusive man, but my dad was determined not to do that same thing to his children, not make that same mistake, not pass on that same legacy. So he made some conscious decisions to see to it that that did not happen. See, he's what I call a hinge generation. And a hinge is a little mechanism on which a door will swing. And a door can stay closed on that hinge, or on that very same hinge, that door can swing wide open and allow access into another room or even into a wide open space. And I'm convinced of this because generational curses like abuse, like trauma, like addiction do not have to be passed on. They can be hinged. They can be hinged by a single person in a generation that says, "Not on my watch. We're going to turn it. We're going to turn it." And I want to leave you with this last story, and I think you will be convinced that my father was my hinge. I grew up in northeastern Oklahoma on a little 26-acre farm. And I was probably 15 miles away from school and equidistant from any kind of friends or classmates. So I spent a lot of time alone out on this land. And Dad, one of the ways he would spend time with me is we would ride motorcycles together. We had two little Yamaha dirt bikes. And I can remember many a Sunday afternoon, we'd ride those gravel roads in Washington County around our house, just he and I. But when he could not ride with me, I took to the trail that he mowed out for me on our 26 acres. 2.2 miles even, that went up the hill, through the woods, around the pond, down along the hay meadow, and then back up the hill again. And I would spend hours out there riding. But for some reason, a 10-year-old boy did not feel like that was enough space. So he thought, well, let's just include the backyard and the front yard. So now, going up the hill, through the woods, around the pond, along the hay meadow, I would come back in through the back gate, through the backyard, around the house, into the front yard, and then back up the hill. And as you can imagine, a path was worn very quickly, a visible path that was seen from the road out front. And one day, a neighbor stopped by, like you do out in the country, stopped by to visit my dad. And I did not find out about this conversation until probably 20 years later. Neighbor asked Dad, "Jack, why you let the boy tear up the yard like that? Why don't you make him keep out in the pasture?" That's a reasonable question, right? Reasonable. You know, why would he do that? But see, hinges aren't always reasonable because they're thinking about something else. They're thinking about a future they're not thinking about right now. And they're thinking about the impact that their decisions will have on that future. And my dad's response was profound. He said, "Well, the way I see it, The grass will come back, but the boy won't. I'll let him ride. I visited that property earlier this spring. The grass has come back. We don't even own that property anymore. My dad passed 18 years ago. But that little boy is a man now telling a story about a most important hinge in his life. And I can tell by some of the nods out here that I'm not the only beneficiary of a hinge. You have your own story that you could probably get up and tell, but I'm willing to bet that in the hearing of my story, somebody in this room realizes, oh, you're the hinge. You're the one that's going to take that future generation into a better direction than what you were handed. You will give a legacy different and redeem something that was handed to you wrongly. And to you, I say, let him ride.
One more round of applause for Kevin Shinn. Got me thinking about the hinges in my life. My goodness. Friends, before you go, we have to save a round of applause for some very special people that we want to say thank you to. The Nebraska Storytelling Festival was put on by a small group of friends. I'm going to read through the list of them now at the end. Can we please give them all a round of applause? Of course, Jan and Randy Bretz, we can give you a round of applause by yourself. Thank you so much for bringing us all together. It's an honor to be included. Mary Kay Roth, let's give her a round of applause. We have Doug Dickinson, Molly and Ryan Weber, thank you. Rich Clausen, Bill Anderson, myself, Dwayne Taylor, and Marsha White. Can we give them a round of applause? We also want to say a big thank you to both Humanities Nebraska and Nebraska Public Media for their support throughout the Storytelling Festival beforehand, and of course their support afterwards. Friends, with that being said, that is your second annual Nebraska Storytelling Festival. Thank you so much for coming out. Have a safe drive home, and we will see you next year.